The rain in the trees keeps time like a small, steady hand. It drips and gathers and falls in a rhythm that seems older than our counting. In the hollow of the wood, beneath a canopy of wet leaves and the breath of peat, a lamp waits on a low table, its glass a warm throat of light, its wick humming softly as if pleased to be tended. If you like, make yourself as comfortable as the keeper's stool by that lamp. Fold as you would into a thick cloak, loosen the shoulders that have been carrying the day, and listen as the hut begins its slow evening. The hut sits where the forest opens, not on a road, but on a hollow track where foxes once trod, and where folk bring what they intend to keep safe. It is small in the way of old things, and careful. A round door with a leather thong, a threshold stone worn by years of footfall and the soft scrapes of baskets. Moss gathers at the base, matted and cool. The air about the entrance always smells of damp oak and beeswax. A bell of shell hangs there, threaded on twine, to sound when hands are full and voices dim. The keeper keeps the bell for no great reason beyond habit and welcome. It is the kind of sound that says you have arrived and are safe to be seen. She is an elder by the count of seasons, though not so old that her hands forget the work they hold. Her name is spoken modestly in the hamlet. You may hear it whispered on market mornings, or muttered like a blessing on days of rain. She keeps the thresholds, literal and figurative. A seam of cloth across a doorway, the little shrine by the brook, the panes that turn lamplight into a guarded glow. Her hands are steady, freckled with the sun of years in the garden, and nicked in ways that mean stories. She speaks softly, not from frailty, but from the knowledge that small things have long ears. Inside, the room is hung with things that have been mended and made again. A net of twine and beads that used to hold herbs. A battered wooden box with a new iron hinge. A row of glass bottles whose necks have been wrapped in leather for better keeping. There is a sand glass of hollowed shell, small and filled with pale granular sand. Hollow glass, they sometimes call it here, not for its shape, but for the way it measures space between one small event and another. 3 times during an evening, the keeper will turn that hollow glass, each time as a soft ceremony, to mark the passing of tasks. The light being trimmed, the food being shared, the house being made ready. The sand goes with a hush, one grain against another. It falls with the same patience the rain outside keeps to its leaves. She prepares her evening in a set of small, repeated acts. First, the lamp is brought from its shelf, wiped with a cloth that smells of soapwort and lemon sedge. The lamp glass is not perfect. It has a pebble of cloud in its base and a hair-thin crack mended with a strip of hide years ago. That imperfection is noted and loved, for it is the sign of what has been kept. The wick is trimmed with careful fingers, the cut made at a precise angle that the keeper learned from an old woodbinder decades past. Then beeswax is melted thin and brushed along the rim of a jar, a second skin to keep the breath of rain from spoiling the flame. Each movement is a sentence in a familiar story. A kettle is put upon the small hearth, its belly of hammered iron singing with the first whisper of heat. Tea here is not a hastily steeped thing, but a slow brewing of dried leaves picked in the warm month, their scent pressed into paper and bound with twine. The keeper warms a cup for herself, presses a cloth to the lid to catch the steam, and listens. Listens to the rains counting on the canopy, and to the soft ache of the wood that settles with the coming damp. There is a stone seat by the low window. The keeper sits there as though taking stock of the night and the things that need tending. She keeps a book, though not in the manner of scholars. It is a small, leather-bound ledger of repairs, of names and mended seams, and the color edges used on cloth. Inside are tiny sketches of patterns, a pressed sprig of silverweed, notes in a hand that trembles only on the days the weather is particularly raw. People bring her objects and stories in equal measure. A bowl with a hairline fracture, a child's shawl with a missing tassel, the recollection of a song remembered half true. She listens and sets each thing to its place, deciding whether it should be washed and rewoven or simply wrapped and given a new stitch of meaning. There are other talismans, too, of a humbler sort. A strand of small shells threaded on hemp sits near the door. They catch the lamplight and shine like tiny moons. A handful of the keeper's stones, flat, river-smoothed, cool to the touch, is kept in a shallow dish, each stone noted for its particular weight and sound when tapped. And there is always the hollow glass waiting in its cradle, a small instrument of time that the keeper trusts more than the loud measures of other people's clocks. She winds a scrap of thread around a finger, then sets it down. It is not a task yet, merely the promise of one. Evening in this place gathers people like water to a hollow. They come without hurry, in the manner of those who have spent the day bending to small matters, and who prefer the mutter of mending to the shout of talking. The first to arrive is often the gardener, hands still soil-dusty, carrying a small bundle of bulbs wrapped in damp leaf. He sets them gently on the bench, bumps them with a thumb as though greeting kin. The seamstress comes next, her pockets full of linen tape and spare buttons wrapped in scraps, her scissors tucked into a belt of woven leather. A woodbinder brings a mallet with a silenced face and a stub of soft wax the color of bees' honey. A child slips in at the tail of the group, damp curls plastered to their forehead, clutching a scrap of cloth that needs a tassel. None of them speak above the hush of the lamp. Their voices are careful and soft as they exchange what news they must. Who mended a cartwheel? Which hedge needed a new binding? Where a fox was seen with a bright tail like a ribbon in the dusk. They sit in a loose ring and set their burdens in the middle like small offerings. The gardener's bulbs smell faintly of earth and lemon. The woodbinder's wax smells faintly of resin and the dark of the workshop. With these, the keeper considers the threshold. There is an old cloth stretched across the doorway between the hut and the path, a protective seam that keeps the rain from finding its way deep into the house, and that sings, in its own small way, of the hamlet's habit of being careful with what it loves. Tonight, that cloth shows a frayed edge where a dog, months ago, brushed too boldly. A small pane in the shrine beside the door has cracked in a hairline arc. Moss has found its way to the step and pressed itself into a small green face. None of these are disasters. They are rather the precise sorts of troubles that call for quiet hands and company. This seam has been on its way out these 5 years, the keeper murmurs, lifting the cloth and letting the lamp catch on its threads. It has done its work. It wants a new look, I think. Not hidden away, but let it hold the passers-by with a little more warmth. Make of it something that will sing at night, says the seamstress, fingers already reaching to feel the threads. Something that will throw the lamp's color across the path like a small blessing. It might be pleased to see a little of the forest before the dawn, the gardener adds. He taps the bulbs with a thumb and gives a small laugh, the sound of one who prefers the living things to the loud talk of markets. A color that will not frighten the creatures. They talk in quick, small sentences, fitting ideas like beads on a string. Ideas are gathered as simply as the materials. Strips of translucent bark that the woodbinder has often used for lamps, threads of spun nettle in a russet shade, the keeper's own glass charms, thin and milky, that flutter when the air moves. The suggestion comes with the hush of the rain. Instead of simply patching the cloth where it frays, why not set small panes of translucent material into its fold so it might catch the lamp and pour light back out? Instead of a mere repair, make a new threshold that keeps and gives light. Not windows, the keeper says, smiling as she says it, but charms, panes that will want the lamplight like a cupped hand. It is said, in these parts, that the fair folk have a particular eye for what shimmers. They are not the making of terror stories, nor the kind of beings that cause harm. Rather, they are neighbors of liminal things, the edges of paths, the space between hearth and door, and they like small, bright work. Some say that on nights of heavy rain, the fair folk leave a tune hung in the hedgerow, or they settle a single, glossy leaf across a sill as if to try the fit of it. The keeper says these things with a smile and a manner that is careful not to insist. She never speaks of the fair folk as one would speak of a table or a chair. They notice color, she says. They notice the little panes that turn light. It is only a tale, but folk have always taken care to leave a sweet or two when they mend, on a night the like of this. Then we should leave them a seam to tend, the seamstress answers, already measuring a strip with the tip of her finger. A little offering, and the cloth will take our touch. If the small ones do come by, they will find something to admire, and we shall find our stitches held. Small offerings are prepared as gently as the mending. A pot of boiled cream spiced with a scrap of ginger from the keeper's larder. A length of bright thread tied into a neat knot. A scrap of bread spread with honey and wrapped in a cloth. None of it is an attempt to bargain, only an act of courtesy the kind one offers to a neighbor who has been known to meddle with the unfastened things. Children, who learn in a dozen small ways what it is to live in a place where mending matters, are given the smallest and most patient of tasks. The child with the damp curls is shown how to fold a strip of translucent bark into a pane, smoothing it with the flat of a thumb until it takes the light smoothly. The gardener shows a younger lad how to tie twine with a secure loop, not the hurried knot that will slip, but one that will hold the leaf in place come wind. The woodbinder, grinning like any teacher, holds a small mallet and gently demonstrates the right pressure to seat a grommet without cracking the tender material. These are quiet lessons, without wordiness, and the children learn with a slow focus that has the sort of reverence adults call simple, and children call serious fun. As hands move, stories drift in like the steam from the kettle. One of the older neighbors speaks of a particular night years ago when a woman mended a lantern and left it near the brook. Come dawn, the neighbor found the lantern heavy with small white feathers tucked inside. Nothing else to explain it but the hush of an overnight visitor. Another tells of a seam that held a husband's devotion through 4 winters, patched and patched until it shone like a quilt of small victories. These stories are short and told like gifts, a nudge rather than a lecture. They hang in the air between the clink of a needle and the tear of a thread, and they make the work feel like a continuation of a long conversation. When the decision is reached, it is done not by ceremony but by agreement. The seam will be remade with panes of the translucent bark, and threaded with nettle twine, dyed with a warm rust from the roots of a common shrub. The panes will be set so that, at dusk, the lamp's light will pour through them and spill across the damp track in bands of honey and smoke. Little charms, A circle of shell, a bead of river glass, a braided scrap of copper will be threaded along the top. These shall not be talismans in the heavy sense, nor promises of fortune. They are the work of people who believe that beauty steadies the passage of night. Let us make sure the pane is not too clear, the keeper instructs, with the modest authority of the one who has seen 5 winters' worth of weather. If it is too bright, it will startle the foxes. If it is too dull, it will not keep the lamplight. Somewhere in between, soft as hush and warm as a shared cup, there is laughter, soft and almost reverent, as if they are in on a small secret. The woodbinder slips off a strip of bark and lays it on the bench. The seamstress draws her needle. Hands at once become the story's instruments. The keeper reaches for the hollow glass, and with a gentle motion she turns it. The pale sand begins its fall again, each grain the same small promise of time. They use the hollow glass without ceremony. Its turning marks the beginning of the work, and its steady whisper underlines the rhythm of knotted twine, the pull of a stitch, the slow set of putty pressed into a seam. Outside, the rain learns the tempo of the room. Sometimes it lifts its voice and then retreats, as if to listen and not disturb. The lamp hums, the sand slides, the kettle breathes on the ember. In the doorway, a single leaf is pushed by an unseen hand and comes to rest on the mat. Whether it was the wind or a curious visitor is a thing to be left to tale. The keeper picks it up, holds it up to the light, and tucks it aside to dry for later, a scrap of color saved to test a pane. As they begin the first small cuts and folds, the conversation becomes a string of quick exchanges, each one practical and kind. Pass the wax, would you? Mind the edge there, it takes a firm thumb. If the child sews that seam, let them press rather than pull. Each instruction is given with the gentleness of someone who has learned that patience is often the only compost from which good things grow. There are moments when the fair folk are mentioned only in a half-remembered phrase. One of the women hummed the old cadence, the opening of a lullaby that some say tethers the small one's attention without meaning to. Another whispers of a tune that sometimes answers the hammer at the edge of the wood, a reply like the twining of 2 reeds. The keeper smiles in a way that says she knows enough of tales to respect their edges. She does not insist they are truth, only that they are useful as tendering tools. The small ones like light, she says again. If anything, leave them a seam to admire. The work spreads like a quiet tide. A piece of bark is softened with warm water until it bends without breaking. The child learns to test the bend with the slow, patient pressure of a thumb. A grommet is set, and the sound it makes when properly seated is a soft, rounded click, like a small bell. Thread is waxed and runs through fabric like a small river finding its way through stones. In this slow montage, hands and objects trade places in importance. The narrative is less of what is said and more of what is made. At one point, as the seamstress begins to stitch a pane into place, a sound like distant singing threads itself into the space. A small high note that could be the wind passing through reed, or the breath of someone at the wood's edge. The room stills. Tools are set down as if not to intrude upon any possible visitor. Those present glance at one another with a kind of delighted, conspiratorial hush. No one claims it as the definitive voice of the fair folk. Instead, it is treated like a welcome, a note left on the sill. Perhaps the note is the rustle of an animal's coat. Perhaps it is indeed the small one's reply. It is allowed to be ambiguous. And in that ambiguity there is comfort, as if the world keeps a margin of surprise for those who make the time to notice. They set a small pot of the cream and honey on the threshold, not to bribe, but to offer, and the seamstress ties a ribbon with a simple knot she learned as a child. The gardener pushes the bulbs into a corner where they will not be trodden upon, and the child smooths the leaf until it lies flat and unwrinkled. These acts are their own kind of prayer, quiet and domestic. As the first panes are raised up toward the lamp, the light comes through them and throws ribbons across the floor, columns of honey and smoke that bend in the damp like the colors of old stories. Outside, the rain pauses in its counting, or at least seems to. The lamplight spills through the new openings and paints the path as if to say, "Pass through here with gentleness." The keeper watches the way the light falls and steadies her mouth in a contented line. "There," she says simply, "that will do." They do not yet fix the whole cloth. This is work that cannot be done in haste or with hands tired. They pause, their shoulders easing, and the hollow glass is turned again. The sand begins to fall a second time. The quiet rearranges itself into a new ease. Someone fetches a portion of bread. Another pours the warmed tea into small cups. A child is given the small honor of carrying a cup, and the community watches with the soft attention of people who know that such small honors shape a life. Conversation resumes in lighter ways, stories now fitted to the leisure of a pause. Tales of past men's flow like warm water. The neighbor who stitched a widow's mitten back into shape. The carpenter who devised a hinge that sang like a bird when it opened. Each story is short and full of tenderness, the kind that keeps a place together. They speak of the fair folk with the same modest wonder, not as a catalogue of sightings, but as a series of small testimonies. A ribbon found woven into a hedgerow, a pebble left on a sill with a curious sheen. "It is said," one says, and the sentence hangs like a small charm in the air. Outside, the path glows faintly with the light sent through the first panes. The forest answers with a hush that is not emptiness, but a kind of listening. A breeze lifts, and for a moment the charms at the top of the cloth catch and turn, producing a whisper like distant bells. The child claps, delighted at the sound. The elders smile as if remembering the first time they, too, were allowed to clap at such simple marvels. The keeper reaches for the hollow glass again, and for a third time this evening she turns it. The pale sand slides in its narrow throat, a dependable, private waterfall. The sound of it is small and regular, and somehow more persuasive than any of the louder measures of the day. With each grain that falls, breaths in the hut slow a little, as if the sand asks them to follow. The room grows warmer from the lamp, and the body heat of 5 or 6 pairs of hands. The work left to do is measured now in small pieces and patient breath. They agree, finally, to break the work across 2 evenings. Tonight, the panes will be set into the cloth and pinned. Tomorrow, with hands fresh, the finer stitches and charms will be attached. The choice feels natural, as if the hut itself suggested the rhythm. It leaves the heart of the repair intact, while allowing for the proper rest that mending deserves. There is a soft pause then, a communal breathing out, and the keeper fills the cup nearest to her with tea. She lifts it as if to toast the small agreement, and in the movement catches the light in the rim of the cup. For a moment the lamp seems to gather its breath and settle, the way an animal curls its tail before sleep. If you are settling in for the night, stay with the light a little longer. The hour is gentle here, and the kind of attentions given this evening make the hollow seem like a good place to be. Perhaps you will carry a little of it into your sleep. The scent of beeswax, the memory of hands that know their craft, the hush of a sand glass counting out the small measures of a well-spent night. They put aside the needles and fold cloth into a neat bundle. The seamstress tucks a scrap of nettle twine into the child's palm and shows them, without much fuss, how to roll it into a neat coil for the morning. The gardener collects his bulbs and murmurs about the best patch of earth, while the woodbinder retrieves his mallet and pats its face in a habitual manner, checking it is still sound. The kettle is left to smoke softly on the hearth as the lamp is lowered a fraction, to keep the light from running through the whole world like a shout. The hollow glass sits in its cradle and waits, pale and patient. As the neighbors stand to leave, each places a palm on the threshold cloth as if to bless the work in a practical sort of way. The keeper sees every hand and gives a small nod to each person. When the last of them steps onto the path and the bell of shell tinkles in the drizzle, there is a small chorus of good nights, and the wood embraces them back. When the door settles, the room feels momentarily empty and intimate. The keeper moves to the shelf and takes down 3 small treats from a drawer, a pinch of sugared spice and 2 honeyed crumbs wrapped in leaf. These are set on the little ledge outside the doorway, not meant for anyone in particular, but left as a courtesy to passing folk. She does not say a thing about the fair folk, only performs the act as she always has, a habit of leaving something for whatever might pass by in the night. She walks the hut once more, her hands finding the familiar places. The cradle for the hollow glass, the hook for the lamp, the jar of spare twine. Her movements are without hurry. The rain on the canopy keeps its soft time. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl gives a single, low call, the kind of sound that folds into the rest rather than breaking it. The keeper takes a small stool to the window and sits, the lamp now low, its circle of light comfortably contained. Through the fresh panes of the threshold cloth, the path shows as ribbons of warm color, and for a while she watches the way the bands fall across the moss. A small leaf, damp and shining, lies on the step as if left to test the new light. She smiles very slightly and turns the hollow glass one more time, though the night needs no counting. The sand falls with the same slow hush, and her breath matches it. The steadying acts of the evening have shifted the hamlet's margin. Something has changed in the way the light will answer the rain, in the way children's fingers will now know the feel of thin, translucent bark, in the way a strand of bells will sing when touched by passing air. The keeper folds her hands and lays them in her lap. There is work yet to be done, the charms to be threaded, the finer stitches to be set, the grommets to be tightened so they will weather the wind. But for now, the house is warm, the lamp is steady, and the hollow glass whispers its measure into the room. She rises then, with the quiet dignity of someone who keeps vigil without grand pronouncements, and goes to the shelf to fetch a small book. It is not the ledger of repairs tonight, but a little volume of verses, the sort of thing that speaks of peat and dusk, and the way moonlight sits on a low hill. She opens it at a place she has read often, and lets her finger rest on the line, as if to mark a stopping place entered into deliberately. The page smells faintly of oil and old paper, and that particular kind of quiet that holds a day's making. Outside, just at the edge of where lamplight meets leaf, a tiny brightness shimmers, not unlike a mote of morning caught in the wrong season. It moves a pace and stays, as if attention itself were visiting the work. Whether it is the wind laying a dew-brighted web across a twig or a small one testing the seam of the world, the keeper does not press for certainty. There is comfort enough in the tilt of light, the folding of thread, the soft song that seems, for a breath, to accompany the lamp's breath. And so the evening stretches, a slow, careful arc. There is a sense of a story begun, with hands poised to take the next stitch. The forest keeps its wet and ancient watching. The lamp holds its small, patient flame. The hollow glass counts the moments like a private metronome. The keeper seats herself and opens her hands, palms up, to feel the room's warmth. The work is not finished, but it is engaged, and that is, in its own small way, enough to make a good night. Morning comes slowly to the hollow, not with a sudden brightness, but with a soft untying of gray. The rain eases to a continual hush that is more like breathing than news. The keeper rises when light thins to a color that suits her hands, moves through the little room with the unhurried precision of someone who has all the time the day will give, and lays out her tools. The mallet sits beside the mallet's cloth. The box of spare grommets is opened and tipped into a dish so each can be chosen without fuss. The hollow glass rests in its cradle, pale sand waiting in the throat like a patient listener. She tends the lamp, topping the oil, wiping the glass so that earlier fingerprints no longer soften the lamplight's path. The hamlet does not expect haste. The gardener returns before the late sun, bearing a basket of shoots and a little cloth-wrapped parcel of root and dye. The seamstress arrives with a shoulder less heavy than the night before. She has slept and dreamt of even stitches. They seat themselves around the bench again, the way one gathers around a hearth, and set about with the particular calm that comes when people resume what they began well. The keeper nods to the child and tucks into her palm a small, blunt needle with a ribbon looped through its eye. "Take this," she says, voice a hush like cloth sliding, "and hold it how you like. If it feels stubborn, breathe and wait. It will cooperate." The child balances the needle with solemnity and practices pressing it into a scrap until the motion becomes a tide. One by one, the tasks are allotted like comfortable shoes. A thought for sturdiness here, a chance for a little ornament there, a job small enough to make a child feel the meaning of help. They begin as they left off. The bark panes are softened in warm water until they give and will not splinter when curved. The seamstress marks the places where panes must sit so that light will fall through in bands rather than a blind glare. The woodbinder fashions a simple frame from a sliver of hazel, shaved and tied with twine so the pane has a small border to nestle into. Putty is mixed, a careful blend of a fine ash and powdered lime that the keeper measures by the weight of her thumb. It is pressed soft and firm into the seam with a flat stone until the edge is smooth and shyly matte. Thread is waxed until the fibers glint and slide like small lit ropes through the cloth. The action of running it through beeswax is like teaching a thing to trust its own motion. Conversation threads through the work, short stories and small instructions. The gardener recalls a time when a leaning fence was straightened with the same kind of patience as a hem, not by force, but by the slow drawing of one rope against another. The seamstress tells of a coat that survived a winter because the tailor stitched with patience where others might have lashed. These are not lessons for the sake of pointing, but memories that cushion the hands at work. Each anecdote is a little map, showing how to move through trouble without making a drama of it. More than once, the keeper pauses to hold a pane to the lamp and watch the result. She admires the way a milky strip of bark softens the light, how the oats and honey color of a particular twine picks up the lamplight and returns it in a narrow ribbon. Match it to the weather, she suggests, smiling. If tonight will be the kind of dark that keeps close, choose something to make a longer conversation with the path. If the wind will come, choose a strip that will let the lamp keep to itself. Small hands learn to do big things by degrees. The child practices folding the bark so that one edge makes a neat, small curve. A younger apprentice is taught to press a bead of putty with a gentle finger until it sits like a small silver moon. The seamstress shows how to make a neat dart so the pane will sit flush and not let rain find its way. These lessons are given without fuss and received without show. They are the slow law of community craft. As the afternoon moves toward dusk, the keeper sets the hollow glass in its cradle and turns it, starting its pale flow anew. It is a private instrument, but also a shared metronome. Each grain that slips past asks for a breath in return. The room settles with that tiny insistence. Hands move in a quiet rhythm, the sound of waxed thread along cloth, the soft rasp of a grommet being eased into place, the thud of a mallet muffled by a cloth pad. What they make is both useful and lovely. The panes are stitched with a gentle bias so that when a traveler treads the path, the lamplight will tilt across the moss in soft bars, not in rude flashes. At one point, while the gardener shapes a coil of nettle twine, the woodbinder tells of a moonlit night years ago when he set a lantern outside the smithy. Come morning, he found a long, thin feather tucked into the hinge of the box, neat as a note. He had looked at the feather and thought first of bird, and then felt a small humor at the thought of some unseen friend having admired the metal. The seamstress laughs and says she once found a pebble warm to the touch in her apron, and took it as a sign that someone had passed by and given their attention to her work. These stories are again half at play and half at tribute to what the work invites. They do not claim to instruct the world on its mysteries. They only mark the strange and courteous things that sometimes happen when people make something with care. Outside, the forest breathes softly. The path beyond the threshold seems to deepen with the light caught in the nearly finished panes. The clouds have thinned, and the rain's voice is now an even skin on leaf. Occasionally, the small one's presence is hinted at by a movement at the very edge of sight. A sudden tidying of an unruly twig, a small bright resin drop appearing on a twig where none was before. The keeper notes such things with the same manner she uses for the weather. Respectful curiosity, no need to be the first to name it. As the last pane is eased into its place, a moment arranges itself that is quiet and full. The seamstress makes the final pass of stitch and knots off with a neat tuck. The child presses the putty into the last corner until it gives the right, soft sound, and the woodbinder seats the final grommet. For a moment no one moves, everyone contemplating the seam that has been remade not as disguise, but as welcome. Light flows through the new panes and falls in gentle ribbons upon the threshold. Tiles of moss and wet earth beyond are dabbled in honeyed bands that make the path look less like a route and more like an invitation. They stand back, not for ceremony, but for the simple satisfaction that comes when something has been well done. The keeper touches the new seam as if testing the warmth of bread. "It will hold," she says, and in her voice there is the calm of someone who has watched 1,000 small things prove their steadiness. The interplay with the fair folk is soft and never asserted. As the repairs are finished, a tiny sound brushes the ear, like a note put on the lip of a shell, a tone made of wind and water, easily mistaken for the rustle of leaf. The child, who has been fidgeting with a charm on a string, slips outside for a breath and returns with a small, bright leaf placed perfectly in the fold of a pane where it catches the light. No one speaks. No one claims to know who set it there. It is accepted like a comment left in the margin of a book. Curious, graceful, and full of suggestion. The evening meal is simple and shared. Thick slices of simple bread, a wedge of cheese, the warmed cream with a touch more honey, and the last of the kettle poured into small cups. They sit close enough that the lamp's warmth touches their hands. The keeper serves with economy and care. She offers each a small piece of sugared spice as a nod to the night. Conversation meanders back into tales, but these are now softer, more reflective. Little recollections and the quiet brags of people skilled with their hands. They decide, as they sip and eat, that the charms shall be strung along the top of the cloth, threaded with the bright twine and interspersed with shells, scraps of copper and beads of river glass. Nothing heavy, the keeper instructs. We want the cloth to move kindly when the wind comes, to bend and bow rather than shout. The child is given the task of passing the beads along the thread, a solemn duty treated with more attention than many grown tasks. Each bead is chosen, tested to see how it sits against the light, and threaded with a small knot to keep it from wandering. When the last charm is in place, the keeper takes a moment to step outside. The air is cool and clean. She places the small pot of cream and the honeyed crumb on the ledge, folds a tiny scrap of linen over them, and leaves them with no fuss. When she turns, the path glows in the way she had hoped. The strain of rain softened by panes that are neither glass nor full leaf, but a kind of middle light that invites without brightening too much. It is an arrangement that seems to say, pass with your trouble if you must, but do so with gentleness. They test the seam by passing their palms along it. It is firm and pliant both. The keeper fills the hollow glass once more and stands it on the bench. Letting the sand run a little while, she speaks a soft instruction. When you sleep, remember that small things have their own time, she says, not as a lesson, but as a musing. They do not hurry, and so they keep. Tonight, let your breath keep with that pace. There is a ritual, small and practical, for closing up. Tools are returned to their boxes. Wax smears are wiped clean with cloth. The mallet is wrapped and put back into its place. The keeper goes through the motions in a sequence known to all who keep. These acts are not magic. They are a way of telling the hands that they will be ready again. She ties a final knot in the twine left over and hangs the coil beside the door for the next person's need. They all give the threshold a last look and then prepare to part. The gardener lifts his cap and says good night in a breath. The seamstress smooths her hands and gathers her scissors with the simple, gentle pride of someone who has completed a plain, important task. Children are sent home with pockets tucked and cheeks still warm from the lamp. The woodbinder pats the bench with a satisfied grin and calls out a small, practical jest as he steps into the dim path, his waxed mallet steady in his hand. As the light thins and feet recede along the track, the keeper turns the hollow glass for the final time that evening. The sand runs, and their breathing, matching its movement, finds a quieter frequency. The lamp is lowered a degree so that its circle is no longer a sun but a comfortable lamp. The room is now a bowl that keeps the light inward rather than sending it out in a shout. She sits again, palms folded, listening to the small domestic sounds that remain. The faint drip from a leaf, the settling of wood, the lazy sigh of someone already asleep in a nearby cottage. Before she retires, she performs the small courtesy that has long been hers. She takes from a drawer 3 tiny portions of sugared spice and 2 honeyed crumbs wrapped in leaf and places them on the ledge. She sets beside them a scrap of bright thread and a bead, not to fix anything but as a gesture of leaving an open hand for the passing small ones. Then, with the same calm that has marked all her movements for the evening, she closes the door and secures the leather thong. The bell of shell gives a soft note as she passes. It is the sound of boundary making, not of exclusion. She climbs the narrow ladder to her small garret, where the bed is humble and neat. The mattress gives a little in welcome. The lamp is now a low congregation of light near the window, and she places the hollow glass on the small table within reach. She does not read long. Instead, she sits a moment with her hands folded and feels the small satisfactions of the evening. The way a packet of bulbs will now sleep in a safer place. The child's small learning. The seam that will last a season or 2 longer because of careful stitches. There is a final lookout through the new panes of the threshold cloth. The path is now a slatted ribbon of warm color laid across the damp dark. For a moment she wonders at the light and at the remade seam. Perhaps, she thinks, the light will be enough to let someone slip by with a burden less heavy. Perhaps not. She does not need the answer. The small work itself is its own good. Now, if you would like, settle as she settles. Make the room you are in a little softer. Ease the shoulders you have been holding high, and let your hands rest as if they have finished a simple, honest thing. If you have a small lamp or a candle, let it be only a slanted friend. If there is a window, imagine the lamplight through the panes turning the outside path to bands of warm color. Put any heavy concerns aside as if handing them to a neighbor, not to be forced away but to be kept safe for the time being. Breathe with the hollow glass for a little while. Turn it in your hands if you have it. If not, imagine it there. Its pale sand running as it always does, steady as patience. Breathe in while a grain collects, and breathe out while it slips away. Inhale for the quiet count of 3. Hold but the briefest while. Release for the count of 4. Let this rhythm be like the motion of a stitch being pulled through fabric, careful and even. Each breath is a small knot that ties you into the present. Picture the lamplight as it falls through the panes. Narrow ribbons that wash your feet in honeyed warmth. Picture the moss beyond the threshold, receiving that light with contentment. The way damp things accept warmth without fuss. Let each ribbon of light smooth a tension from you as if it were a small piece of thread gliding through cloth, easing a fold into place. Now let the narrative of the night itself tuck you in. Here, beneath everything, the rain on leaves as a slow percussion, a rhythm that is neither hurried nor bored. Here, if you can, the faint echo of the child's small applause at a charm that rang true when the wind kissed it. Let such small sounds become a cradle. Not loud, not demanding, merely present. Count with the hollow glass as a kind companion. Turn it once and feel the small sand make the first soft sound. Breathe in with the sand as it gathers, and breathe out as it falls. The keeper has turned it 3 times this evening. Each turn marked a step, a beginning, a middle, and a near rest. Allow your breath to follow that count. In with the sand's promise, out as it slips away. 1 complete cycle. In, hold, out. 2, 3. Allow your shoulders to drop a little more each time. Imagine, too, the small offerings left at the threshold. cream and sugared spice wrapped in a leaf. Think of them not as payment, but as a courteous hand extended to whatever moves along the path. If a smallness of attention has ever lightened your own way, remember it now. If you have small things you keep for others, place them in your mind as soft anchors. A warm cup left on a sill, a note folded into a book, a scrap of thread for mending. These are the kinds of benedictions that do not weigh the world down, but keep it steady. Let your thoughts be the small, manageable things of the hut. The sound of wax on thread, the patience of a thumb smoothing putty, the click of a grommet settling. Do not chase after large answers here. Keep the mind to what can be touched by hand. If a thought intrudes that is wider, tuck it gently to one side as you would fold a loose hem. Return to the steady employ of breathing and of watching the sand. Notice how the breath slows without forcing. Notice how the sand's small, impartial movement asks nothing of you, only the modest return of attention. If a sound reaches you, a wind, a distant bird, a neighbor's low voice, let it be like the woodbinder's mallet, a reminder of craft rather than a summons to worry. Let your muscles find the edges of the bed, and let them ease softly into them. The keeper knows that sleep is less of a conjuring and more of a letting go. She treats it with the same calm care she shows to cloth and twine. As you move deeper into rest, allow sentences to shorten like the day's light. Let images blur and soften. Light becomes a wash of color. Hands become a memory of warmth. The hollow glass a faint, steady promise. Breathe in through your nose. Release out through your mouth. Let each exhale draw you closer to the place where the lantern dimples into the room's shadow, and the world simplifies into a line of things that can be kept. There is no need to coax sleep like a reluctant bird. Let it come as the child learned to press putty, patiently and with faith in small pressure. Sometimes it needs only the rhythm of a shared task, a mindful breath, and a sense that one has done something useful this day, however slight. The hut holds its light and the forest leans near to listen. If the small ones pass by on their silent routes, they have found charms that suit their taste. If they do not, the seam still keeps the threshold, and the light still pours kindly over the step. Either outcome is simple and enough. The keeper's final thought, folded and tucked like the day's last stitch, is contentment at work done with good companions, and the knowledge that tomorrow brings another small task and another chance to make something steady. Rest now. Let the breath draw slow circles like a threaded twine. Let the sand fall and count companions in the hush. If you find sleep, let it be as soft and as restorative as a well-made seam. If you wake before morning, remember only the melody of the lamp and the sand, and know you may return to this quiet as often as you like. If evenings like this suit you, a gentle follow will bring more lamplight stories and the hush of mended things. Good night, and may your thresholds be warm.